Jack Smith, Captain Jack Smith, known to me as, and it's 2016 and we're doing this interview. And it's the month of November, or is it December already?
First, yeah.
First day of December.
Is this the first day of December, 2016? And you're 94 years old?
I will be in April.
In April. Born in 1923. And what town, where were you born?
I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana. My parents were actually from Western Kentucky, but my father had moved a young family, or when he first married, to get to find work. He was working in Indianapolis, and I was the firstborn of 5.
And so did you grow up then in Indianapolis?
No, before I started the school, they moved back to Western Kentucky, around in Paducah, Livingston County, McCracken County area. Mm-hmm. And my actually first year of school was in Paducah, Kentucky. And then they moved to Livingston County, where they both were actually from, just north of Paducah. And I finished high school in Livingston County.
And then somewhere right about that point in time, you were I guess the war was about to start.
We were hearing on the radio and on movie clips. When you go to the movies, they always had movie clips about the war. And I knew very well that as soon as I was old enough, I'd be drafted. And I had a legacy of uncles, maternal uncles who served in World War I in the Navy. And I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal, but I was too young. In fact, I graduated from high school 1 month after I was 16.
Oh.
And so I couldn't go into service yet, and I moved. I joined actually I joined the Citizen Military Training Corps, CMTC. Did you ever hear that? And if you could start when you were in high school, and you could go, if you went 4 summers for training and you graduated high enough in your class, you would commission an Army officer. And I only went 1 year, and I was 17, and I decided to go ahead and join the Navy. But my father wouldn't sign for me because I had to be 18 to go on my own. So finally, when I threatened to find someone on the sidewalk that would sign the papers, he was upset with me, but he said, "All right, give me the papers." And I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana, with my aunt, my mother's sister, and then I was working in a downtown chain restaurant. And finally, when I signed my papers at age 17, I joined the Navy in January '41.
January 41. Mm-hmm. So you were there ahead of Pearl Harbor and everything.
Almost a year. And
you went to boot camp with a lot of people that were coming out of boot camp and going right to the fleet.
Oh, they were turning them out by the thousands out of Great Lakes, where I went. And my company, the company that I started with, graduated, but I was in the hospital with pneumonia. It was so cold, and we were marching and performing outside. So they left me, and I had to go to 20 companies later. And I think that was providential in a way, because many of those in that first company I was in went to Pearl Harbor area, went on those different ships there, and a lot of them didn't make it. Young people. And in my group, they wanted people with some technical expertise, people that could be sent to school and be trained. And so I was selected to go to aviation machinist, they call it aviation machinist mate school. And so I went to Dearborn, Michigan for that training, and then wound up in a squadron in Cape May, New Jersey, right on the coast of Atlantic coast. And what that squadron did was they were involved in in experimentation and installation of guidance systems for aircraft and missiles. And I hope that some of the things that we did may have been used later on in the drones that fly across the. That's the type of work we did. We actually flew full-scale aircraft without pilots in them. We had a guidance system. And then later, after I complained about being not in active combat, they transferred me to outgrowth of that. There were units in, we established a unit in northern Michigan, and then from there to Texas. And what we did, we sent detachments to England, and they had actually, we had flown 4-engine bombers without pilots, and they'd load the bomber down with munitions, and the 2 pilots would take the bomber off and get it airborne, and then a chase plane would come in and take control, and then they would fly the plane out over the sea, and we'd have Navy ships waiting for these guys. They parachuted out of the bomber, and the chase plane took it on over Germany and flew those bombers into munitions factories, into plants that were doing war material. And we hope that some of that technology has translated on down through the years, and it may be used in some of the drones, I don't know. But and that frustrated me, because again, I was in a unit that was providing services that was actually in combat. And so about the time they were getting ready to send me really into a real hot situation, the war ended.
Never got your chance to get out there.
And by that time, I was a chief petty officer at age of 21. And I took a lot of gaff from some of the older chiefs who had been around 16 years or so before they made chief. And I had an interesting thing happen. I went to my first meal in the chief's mess as a chief petty officer, slick arm, no hash mark, sitting by a couple of guys, and they were both snarly. And this one fellow sitting on my right, he looked at that food, he said, that's not worth eating. He raked it off on the table, off of his plate.
Gosh.
That's a kind of environment I went in.
Well, yeah, rugged
And
characters,
then,
huh?
When I moved into the chief's quarters, I couldn't get any assistance. Where am I supposed to be? Where am I supposed to sleep? They said, hell, find you a bunk, and if you can find a locker, you use whatever you want. That's an attitude. But later on, they sent me, after the end of the war, to Pensacola, Florida, Naval Air Station Pensacola, and to a unit at Corey Field, which is a satellite field, that had based on that unit the flag aircraft and the contingent take care of it. And I wasn't there long until I was invited to meet the pilot of the flag aircraft. Jocko Garish, his name. And he said, we've been looking, our crew chief, our plane captain is leaving, retiring. He said, we're looking for a younger chief. Would you be interested? And I said, well, sure. Admiral Frank Turkey Neck Wagner was the chief of naval training, and that was his aircraft. So he said, well, before we sign you up, we're going to take about a 2-week flight out through the west coast and all around, and you go with us. I want the admiral to observe you, and I want to see how you perform. You know what he's interested in? How would I party in the places we went? that was his focus. And he was a great pilot. He had shot down some airplanes in World War II. And interestingly enough, he was one of the naval air pilots, an enlisted pilot that was temporarily commissioned so that he could go in combat. And Jocko Garish actually shot down some aircraft. I don't remember if he was an ace or not. Seemed like he was, but I couldn't And, but we went on a long trip, and sure enough, every night there was a party wherever we were. There better not be a wallflower in the party. But when we came back, he said, well, everything's going fine. You're our guy.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Was it, we in that at that time frame they discharged so many people because they'd been in the service. We wound up with more chiefs than we did Indians. We actually had chief petty officers sweeping down the hangar decks in the Corey Field. We'd get 4 or 5 of the brooms and we'd sing a ditty and push. That's interesting.
Well, that was right about the same period that our dad had joined in 41, also in early 41. Might have been at boot camp by the time you were, and went as an aviation machinist mate, wound up with PBYs with a unit out of Iceland primarily. But that was.
Can I answer